when you're Bill Simmons, you don't need
Oh,
the whole
stop.
fancy introduction. You just sit down and start. Hey, how's it going?
It's going great. Thanks everybody for coming on a Friday. Looks like it's nice out too.
That is nice.
Yeah,
Well,
guys are
it's
indoors.
your California weather. That's you brought this weather.
Yeah.
But thanks for coming all the way in from California. I know
Thank you.
you're an
I
alum
gotta
and
figure out the right
everything,
way to sit.
but still. So I want to ask this: when you were their age,
I want to say I'm a fake alum because I got my master's here. Does that count?
where's the dean?
like,
Where's the dean?
You're
I'm
4
sure
years here. You're like a real alum. And
Believe
I
me,
feel
I'm
like I was here
sure.
for like 8 months. It was like a cup of coffee, and I
they
got a
will
master's.
they will identify you and they will grab hold of you as their own. I'm sure. So yes, it still
I
counts.
will say though, I had a couple great courses, and one of them was with this guy Mark Kremer, who I think might still be here. And it was a nonfiction writing class, and it was just awesome. Like I learned so much about the craft of writing and about saving words, and he got so far in my head with was and is, and using those as relying on those as verbs. Of course, I've forgotten like 90% of everything I've learned.
That's why
from
you have
that.
editors.
I wish I had the same habits that he taught in that class, but it was just. I probably had 3 life-altering teachers over the course of my life, and that was one of them. So it was totally worth it to go
Hey,
here.
just to have one is pretty
Yeah.
significant. So when you were their age,
Yeah.
the student's age,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think you were going to do with your life?
I was most focused on where I was going that night. No, I was Generation X, which do you guys even know what that is at this point? It sucked. It was pre-internet, but it was kind of, more people are coming out of college, and more people wanted to do the same types of things. It was just really hard to find a job, and it was like, I had a column in college for all 4 years at Holy Cross that was doing pretty well, and at some point I said to myself, I want to do this. I want to write a column. I think I can get paid for this, and that's how I ended up getting my master's here. The issue was you come out of that, and then it's like, all right, where am I going to have a column? There's 2 newspapers. There's Boston Magazine. There's Boston Phoenix, and then that was it. There was no internet yet, and it was just really hard to try to figure out how to get seen, where to write. And now I think the difference now is that you can be seen. I mean, that's also dangerous too, because there's ways to get seen that maybe aren't the right ways to get seen.
Such as?
Some hot takes and being an asshole. But, and also like you can get attention faster, which I don't think necessarily is a good thing. I think, especially when I started my old website, and I made a ton of mistakes with that, but the reality is you're trying to put thought into stuff because you want to stand out in some way. And now I think it's a little bit easier to stand out, which can be good and bad.
Right. When you say starting your own website, are you talking about The Ringer at this point?
No,
Or
I
not,
had.
we're talking about
This
before-
site was on
way,
Digital
way,
City
way back.
Boston. Yeah, AOL. The first 18 months, it was AOL only. You had to have an AOL email address to even read it. Think about that. By the way, I still have AOL, so I don't want to say too much. But yeah, I mean, it was like I was writing for 5,000 people the first couple of years, and maybe even less than that a couple of times. But that, I mean, the internet was like the wild, wild west back then. It was totally different.
So it's funny. So it's funny. You're talking about writing for 5,000 people.
Yeah.
You've come a long way, young man.
Yeah,
Because November of 2015, you interviewed Barack Obama for GQ magazine.
For the second time.
Right. And I want to ask you the first question that you asked him, which I loved. You asked the president, if you could go back to 2008 and tell yourself one thing, what would it be? Bill Simmons, you go back in time and could ask yourself, could tell yourself one thing, what would it be?
I would probably say enjoy it more. I think sometimes when you get super competitive about stuff and you're just trying to go for the next challenge all the time, sometimes you don't take a breath and kind of look around and be like, this is cool. I should enjoy this more. I know that's a bad answer, but I think as I'm getting a little older, and especially like watching kids grow up and stuff, you start looking back and you go, this is cool. I get to write about sports and talk about sports and talk about things that I like for a living. And I think I think sometimes when people get in the mode of they're trying to put up content or trying to preserve whatever place they have, they don't really kind of appreciate that. I'm sure you felt the same way, right? There's
I know
times
exactly
you're
what you're
like,
talking
man,
about.
why was it such a crazy person about this or that, or why did that matter? It's like I just should have sat back. Like today, I wrote this MVP column for The Ringer that I probably spent 3 days on. It was really fun. I love writing, and the piece was good, and it goes up, and then people get to read it, and they can either agree or disagree. But that's a good life. And when I think back to like, especially when I was in the stands, like these kids, not knowing what the hell is going to happen to me, it's pretty good.
This interview is about you, not me, but I will say that
I thought this was about the future of sports journalism.
we're getting there. Just relax.
I didn't know this was going to be about me.
But we have to talk a little bit
Okay.
about you. But we're going to talk about me for a second.
Yeah.
I was just going to say I agree with you about appreciating the moment. I had my aha moment along those lines in 2008
Mm-hmm.
as the morning that I woke up and I was about to witness a piece of sports history that I'll never see again. And I was very happy to be right there. And that was Michael Phelps winning his 8th gold medal in Beijing. And it's the first time in my career that I said, you got to take this in.
Nice.
Because if this happens, this is so monumental, and you got to allow, it's not going to affect your professionalism, your preparation, your interview, whatever it is, but you got to appreciate this. That was the first moment. So I actually agree with you 100% about when there's special moments that you're in a position for, do take a moment. You don't have to pat yourself on the back or anything like that, but just appreciate them, because those moments could be few and far between. All right, but let me get back. I want to get back to you.
I would also say you can't succeed at anything unless you have a passion for it.
Yeah,
and
no doubt.
especially if you're going to go into sports, if you can see it. I can always tell with, especially like older sports columnists or older talking heads, that you can just tell they don't have the same pizzazz anymore. They're kind of going through the motions a little bit because it's their job. The people know. They always know. And I think if you don't feel that passion for whatever you're writing about or talking about, then it's going to show and it's going to be bad.
I want to stick with the Obama interview for 1 second, because I teach a class in interviewing here at BU. And so if nothing else for my students and beyond, though, how do you prepare to interview the most famous, well-known, probably over-interviewed man on the planet?
Right. I actually didn't think I did that good of a job with that one. I've tried different tactics, and I think the one that's just worked the best for me is to be prepared beforehand, but then not use any notes whatsoever. And in that one, we had like an hour, and I knew I wanted to hit certain things, so I had a piece of paper with me. And sometimes, for me, when I write stuff down, then I end up like looking at it to make sure I'm following whatever the script is in my head, and it actually throws me off. And in that one, I wish I had gone into my head with like, here are the 5 things I know I'm going to veer toward. I'm going toward these, and I'm going to trust that I can remember them. The first time I interviewed him, that's actually what I did. And I actually thought his performance was better than that. This time around, the other thing I underestimated, when you do the president, when you're not videotaping it, then he can filibuster. So you ask him one question, he could take 20 minutes answering it because he doesn't care. He's not being filmed. When he's filming it, he's got to have more of a performance aspect to it. So we start talking about things that he's not crazy about, and he can just veer it in another direction. And then it's the president. It's like you can't interrupt the president. You can be like, well, hold on, but wait. You just can't. So you just got to kind of sit there and write it out. And that one didn't really come alive until we did the speed round. When we did the speed round, which was also questions, you start firing them at him, and he knows he has to go faster, and that's when it hit the rhythm, and that's actually half of what we use for the piece. So, like, I did Kurt Russell on my podcast this week, who's had just an unbelievable career. He's been around since he was on Gilligan's Island in like 1965. I didn't use notes for that one. We went through all his different movies. The only thing I had was my iPad. I had his IMDb. And I was like, let's go through the movies and tell me stories about different things. Those, to me, are the best ones. When it's somebody who has a lot of stories, who doesn't give a shit anymore, and is just letting it fly. Like, to me, that's like the dream interview.
I love when you asked Obama, and I don't know if this was part of the speed round or not, but you had something about if you're out to dinner with Michelle and the phone rings,
That was
basically.
speed round. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was just a great question. If you're out to dinner with Michelle and the phone rings, who are you answering it for? And that was pretty cool.
Well, one thing I remember when you interview somebody like that who's been interviewed a million times, it's like I always try to put myself in their shoes. What kind of question would he want to hear that he hasn't answered, or would make him go, "Oh, that's a good one." Oh, and so I tried to focus on like 10, I don't know, 10 or 12 of those. But the real reason I got 2 interviews with him is because he wants to talk about sports. I mean, he can
Whatever
talk about
it takes, right?
politics with 100,000 people, but he doesn't only get so many chances to talk about the Bulls or something. So I think that's why they looked at somebody like me.
Especially at this stage in your career, who do you learn from?
Young people. I think that was the
They
biggest.
make up the majority of the ringer too now.
Yeah, and that's not an accident. I think when we did Grantland in 2011, I think you can get old in certain ways and not realize it. And I don't mean old like old man on the hill. I just mean like your taste can get old. You can think you're still in the mix, but you're really not. And it happens with music, and it happens with pop culture, and it happens with a whole bunch of things. Internet things people are using. Like, I remember in 2011, we had a fair share of young people, and everybody was Gmail chatting. And that's like not my generation. And I'm watching them, they're 10 feet away from each other and they're Gmail chatting. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? They're listening to a podcast. They have Gmail, they have Twitter open. And just watching the habits of how they interacted, what they cared about, it was just like a revelation for me. And that's when I realized, like, I think one of the mistakes we make when you're creating like a big content infrastructure is to forget to follow the young people, because the young people are always there first. They're there first with music. They're there with trends. They're there with all that stuff. So I think with The Ringer, we kind of doubled down on that a little bit. You make bets on younger people, and you hope you can put them in the position to succeed and grow. And we've had incredible success with that. But the stuff they care about is generally a good litmus test for what's going on. It's early instead of late, which is where you want to be. And
what were the differences that you found in starting Grantland as opposed to The Ringer? Especially considering, this may seem like a specious analogy, but it's sort of like when people will say, he's the next Michael Jordan, to which I say, there will never be another Michael Jordan.
Yep.
Not just because of his athletic ability, but because sports did not look like what it does today.
LeBron's same way.
There will never be. So when you start The Ringer, the media climate looks a lot different than it did when Grantland started. So what are the differences?
Grantland so in 2011, you're talking about merging sports and pop culture into one site, which a lot of people are like, what the hell is that? You can't do that. And then trying to leverage what I guess my brand, for lack of a better word, and standing at ESPN was, to leverage that into a website, which also...
Your brand being sports and pop culture? How would you define your brand?
And me as the centerpiece of it. I think that, that wasn't really something that happened. So I think we had 2 strikes against us from the get-go, where people were like, well, you can't do that, and why does it get to be around him? And, people have their knives up, and it's ESPN. They did a countdown clock, which I tried to talk them out of, on the website leading up to when the site launched, which I don't think helped us that much. But we were always, we had some advantages where ESPN handled scores and breaking news, stuff like that, so we could kind of be a little more detached. And, we thought, spend a little money early on some name writers to kind of carry us, but then ultimately the younger writers would be the ones that would carry the site. It took a while. The design of the site was 100% my fault, but it was terrible. We tried, when we were conceiving Grantland, there were no iPads yet. It was conceived for a desktop. We had this legendary designer design a site that kind of looked like the New Yorker, which is a terrible idea for the internet, but in 2011, it's like, this will work. And, you know, what you realize is you got Audible and Move, and we needed blogs. We had to put those on. We knew podcasts were going to be important, but we didn't know that they would be, you know, one of the pillars for it. And then, you know, the thing that we were great at was just finding talent. And I think, I don't care what it is, if you're good at finding talent, it's a website, it's a TV, it's Sports Center, it doesn't matter. Like, if you can find talent consistently, then you're going to eventually have success. So it took a while. It took, believe me, I was there. It was not an overnight. It was not an overnight success. It took a couple of years, I think, for people to appreciate what we felt we had been doing since day one.
How do you find good talent? What do you identify?
It's a great question. I always look for people that stand out in some way, and that, so first of all, you got to look at, why does that person stand out? What is it about them that I feel like I'm not getting anywhere else? Or are the seeds of that maybe there that eventually they can become this? So you look at that. And then
You're projecting like a draft pick.
Yeah, you really are. You're original voice, passion. If it's a writer, maybe it's just something about their style stands out. It's uncommon. Maybe they're really funny. It's really hard to be funny in print. Like, that's something you stand. Some of you were like, I've never kind of seen that before, like an original prototype. That's always the best type of person to find. But then you also have to figure out, how does everything complement each other? And that's something like, I didn't know if I wanted to do the Ringer again, but I knew once I got the first 4 from Grantland that we hired for the Ringer, I knew we'd be in good shape because we had the infrastructure of, we know what we're looking for. We know how to build around the right people. We know how to make people better, things like that. But you have the people have to make sense collectively. You know, it's almost like if you're building a football team, you don't get Malcolm Butler and Darrelle Revis and Gilmore. Like, you don't need 3 shutdown quarterbacks. You really need one, and then take chances in the other
Bill
spot.
Belichick would get all 3 and then make
Well,
them
Bill
all
Belichick
work,
will
but
just do it and then figure it out later. But you know, it is like putting together a football team. Everybody's got to make sense in the greater scheme. And you know, this time around we didn't have the luxury. Like the first year at Grantland, I wrote a lot. I probably wrote almost as much as I've ever written in my career, and we were able to kind of let other people kind of build up around that. And this time around, we built around the young people right away.
But that was one of
couple
the early
original
sort
voices.
of criticisms, if you will. I want this is Bill Simmons' site. I want Bill Simmons. Where's Bill Simmons? He's not there.
Right. But you got to ride that stuff out. You know, it's like, to us, it's like a 5-year plan to get to where you want to go. And we're also, this time around, so much more multimedia, because I just don't think a website can succeed with writing anymore. You need to be a whole bunch of things, and you need to be prepared to generate revenue a whole bunch of different ways. And this is the biggest issue we had at ESPN was when we had a podcast, a real strong podcast foothold that we weren't able to make money from at ESPN because of some of the ad sales restrictions they had. And this time around, like, you're trying to build this whole universe, and it's not just writing and blogs and podcasts and video. It also becomes branded content and becomes scripted and non-scripted eventually, and producing shows, all these different things. Like, you have to think, you know, 5 years down the road, what does this place look like? And I think we're much better equipped this time than I was at Grantland. At Grantland, it was like, this is a sports and pop culture writing site that's going to have a couple podcasts. And that's what the idea was. And then it blossomed into all these other things. So you got to kind of be ready to ride where it goes.
So what does the climate, what does it look like at the landscape? What does it look like at this point? Because whatever word you want to use, multi-platform, whatever you want to call it, it's not just one single thing. So what does the face of sports journalism really look and feel like at this point?
I think that face looks a lot of different ways, which is what makes it cool. You know, you could have social media can be a huge part of what you're trying to do as a site. It's becoming a bigger part for us, but I think for some other sites, it's been one of the linchpins. And the reality is, you can be super creative on social media. We've had some success the last few months with it, but you think about like what NBA Twitter is like right now, where when you watch the NBA, if you have Twitter open, and Westbrook hits that shot against Denver, and within 3 minutes that clip's online. Within 10 minutes, the great pictures online with all the faces behind them. Then people are cutting the shot and they're adding movies and putting his head on some movie character, and it has this second life, and that just didn't exist 5 years ago. So the ways to be creative, I think, are there's just more of them, and how to execute them, I think, is, like today I wrote a column that went up. I did a podcast for the Ringer NBA show about the playoff race. They cut a 1 minute clip from the podcast I did with the Fast and Furious producer Neil Moritz. That also went up. That was like this little 1 minute thing about could Fast and Furious go into space. This is just content. We're just making content, putting it up, and you just, it's more the consistency of it than anything. It's just, you want to just be consistently there and good.
At this point, what's your most preferred medium? Writing, podcasting, what is it for you?
I still love writing the most. I mean, I took a break from it for, I don't know, about 18 months, which I needed because I was
Did that
pretty
make it
burned
love
out.
you more?
Yeah, I
Love
needed
it
it.
more when
I
you came
needed
back?
to. It's still fun. It's harder. It takes me a little longer. It's like a basketball player in the second half of their career. It's like, my knees hurt tonight. Like, it's definitely like, I look back to 20 years ago, just being able to crank out 3,000 words in 2 hours. Like, I can't. I'm a 2-finger typist. It's my biggest issue. But yeah, I still like writing the most. But I still love the 1 hour interview. To me, is if it's done right with the right person, I still love that the most, when you can really get.
What makes it done right?
You got to get them comfortable and saying stuff that they didn't think they were going to say, and not worried about because they're enjoying the conversation. I think when you get stuff like, I've never said this, or I've never told the story, or you're trying to dive into who somebody actually is instead of who the media, their little media creation of themselves is, and that's really hard.
Isn't that easier on a podcast as opposed to having a camera shoved in your face or shoved in the subject's face?
Podcast's so much easier. I mean, I tried it with the TV show. It's tough. When people are surrounded by a 40-person crew, they're going to hold back a little, or they're going to try to perform, and it's just a different vibe. And if you have less time, you got to rush through it. And, I think with podcasts, just in general, they've completely changed conversation with how we consume it. It's just better on a podcast. It really is. Like, I think there's some exceptions, like Howard Stern has really done an amazing job, but he's basically doing a podcast. So if he has Chris Martin on for an hour and a half, it's basically a podcast. It's live and it's on a radio show, but it's the same kind of DNA. So, and by the way, I'm sure everybody in here has a podcast. So I think we're hitting a point where every
If
single
not, they'll be
person's gonna
starting
have
one as soon
Yeah.
as Bill Simmons said that's what you should do. No.
Well, it's got to stand out, though. It goes back to the whole thing we were talking about. Like, what is it? What's the wrinkle?
Now, you mentioned Howard Stern, the old adage about if you want to be a good writer, you need to be a good reader.
Yeah.
So who do you read, or what site? What do you read? Who do you read? Who do you watch? What's your consumption look like?
I read most of my stuff on my iPad, which is kind of terrible. I can't really defend it. I don't read books as much. I'm more likely to read a book on my iPad than I am to read an actual book. I don't know if it's because my eyesight's getting worse, but I think like a site like Nuzzle to me is really invaluable, because Nuzzle weeds out all the tweets, and it has more like just the links to different pieces. So if you go through, it's just it basically cherry picks all the pieces that people put in your feed anyway, and then you don't have to read their tweets about Trump, which I think is a special bonus. But or like people complaining about their teams or whatever. But yeah, I mean, there's so much good content. For me, it's like I always feel like I'm catching up. And people, like that was with Grantland in 2011. We were doing like these giant oral histories and these features and stuff like that. It stood out. And now if you look around the internet, like that stuff's there every day. Like yesterday, I read that great piece on that Van Natta and Wickersham did about the Raiders in Vegas. That was this gigantic long read, and then I read like 7 other things. You know, that was like an hour and a half. Like, how much time do you have in a day? But it just seems like there's better. People are just better at putting content out now in ways that are easier to read.
So it's interesting because you talk to some students these days, and they want to go into print, or this one wants to go into whatever broadcast journalism means anymore, but video, TV content, whatever it is. And the one thing I always say is you can't be restricted to just one. I mean, even if you're a writer and you write a great story, don't you want to have, even if it's a sidebar, a short video accompaniment, because you've just read it, but you want to see the person, you want to hear their voice, you want to look in their eyes, you want to hear their tone. I mean, is it completely a dinosaur, someone who just wants to be, for example, a print journalist, a writer?
Well, how do you define print? Like you're talking newspapers, magazines,
that's part
or
of
anything?
what you tell me.
I think most people would rather write.
Yeah,
I think most people would rather write in the internet at this point, like because there's less word count restrictions and the ability to get stuff right up. Like I'm sure there's some old school people too, but my only advice on that would be you got to be good at something. You can't try to do 5 things and be a C+ at all of them. You have to have something you're good at. And also it's really hard to become good at something. Like I was terrible at my podcast for 2 years. Like I got a lot of reps doing it. Not a lot of people even listen to podcasts that I started actually 10 years ago next month. I started doing my podcast and I wasn't good at interviewing people and I got a lot of reps. And even in like 2009, I was like, I'm just not that good at this. But I was able, because of the medium and it was so early, that it covered up a lot of the stuff that I wasn't able to do in my column. A lot of
you could make your mistakes before Twitter existed and things like
and you
that.
can make mistakes. And also, like with interviews, like I would have people come over to my house. So I had my little setup in my house, and they loved it. It was almost like going on a date with somebody, And it was like Seth Meyers at my house, and we're gonna shoot the shit for an hour. And then afterwards, like that was great. I love that, because they had never. Now people have done podcast interviews all the time, but over the course of time, I actually think I got pretty good at it. But it took a while, and I think that's one thing I would remind people, especially young people, is like it takes a while. Like you're not gonna. We always say with writers, like I don't think you really figure out writing completely until like your mid-late 30s. I think people can be good at writing, and I think they can find their voice, and I think they can write good pieces. But the consistency of it, knowing what pieces are the right length, knowing how to argue something, it takes a while. To be good at something, to reach your peak at something at age 25 as a writer, I don't think that's realistic.
With the advent of sites like the Players Tribune, or first person, the athlete takes his message directly to the public.
Yeah. Just what we needed.
Exactly. Where do you see the future going with this? The relationship between the athlete and the media, because the athlete feels that they can bypass the journalistic process. They don't need to take questions. They don't need to answer anything. They can just get their message out in whatever way they want. What happens to journalism in that sense, in sports journalism?
So this is not it feels like a recent topic, but it's actually, I remember I was writing for ESPN, the magazine, still in like 2009. That was last year I had my column. And I wrote this piece, I remember, about LeBron that season, about how he was trying to be the first person to basically bypass the media and to get his message out directly. And he wasn't doing it that well, but it was clear that something was happening. And now you fast forward to 8 years later, and I think it exposes a lot about kind of how dumb the old school sports media setup is. Why do we need 100 reporters in a locker room? Why do we go to the conference table setup in the playoffs? Why does anyone even need to be there if we're televising it? why is it so hard to get any access from athletes? Why do they prefer to avoid the media completely and avoid any sort of tough conversation and control that message themselves? These are all really interesting questions. I don't know the answer. Like Kevin Durant, who I've done 2 podcasts with, that were probably 2 of my favorite podcasts I've ever done.
Why were they your favorites?
Because he's not typical. He's not trying to be anyone other than who he is, and he's trying to have, like, he's just a curious guy. And like we did the first podcast we did, I think we taped it at like 1:30 in the morning at this restaurant he likes, and we just had dinner, and then we were talking, and we were talking about his decision to leave OKC. And he's really passionate about it. He's like, people don't understand. They just think I'm this guy who's on their team. They don't care about me as a person. They don't care that I wanted to move to a new city. They don't care that I wanted to try a different basketball experience. I'm just this guy who wore their uniform. And it's like, he wanted to talk about that. I don't think LeBron has had that many honest moments really during his whole career. He's done a perfect job at managing his image and what he's said and what he's put out there. But I don't feel like I know him. I mean, the one time we were doing Countdown, I think in 2013, Game 7 of the finals. So he had just won, and the game before, the Spurs had blown it, and Miami wins Game 7, and LeBron came on our set. And I don't know if it was a combination of he had some champagne maybe. Magic was there. Like, all those guys revere Magic, so they're always going to act a little more, there's a trust that goes because they know Magic's not going to undermine them. And I think it's on YouTube. It's a really good 9-minute interview with LeBron, and he's like, LeBron. And I'm like, this is the guy I knew was in there, but you won't show us this guy. And
You need a little champagne.
he needed a little champagne, and he needed one of the best 5 players ever, 2 seats away, I think. But I think, especially now in the social media era, there's so many mousetraps for athletes, so many ways for them to get in trouble, that's going to make them do this even more and be even more nervous about putting themselves out there. So that when they can control the message, like in Players Tribune or The Undefeated or whatever, and they can just, here's my story. Here's the thing. Not much different than what we grew up with, right? How many as told to books did we read? In the 60s and 70s and 80s, these autobiographies that you knew the guy didn't write. Basically the same premise. It's not like this groundbreaking thing, but I think the one thing I don't get is those uninterrupted videos. You guys seen those? It's like they put the camera on, and LeBron James like, "What's up, man? I'm LeBron," and he just starts rambling for a minute, and then they press send. It's like, what is that? What,
I think
is
they're
this
giving
content?
me access.
I guess.
I got to ask
You're
you,
in the back of a
Kevin
dark
Meredith
car?
sitting right here, what do you mean about the undefeated? You think they are giving too much of a straight voice to the athlete?
Are you trying to get me in trouble?
You said it, not me.
No, I mean it's one of the things they've done, but I don't think it's it's one of their core things.
Right.
I think it's smart. I mean, like the Durant podcast for our site was great. It got us a lot of attention, and it was really good content. I think when it's stuff that seems promotional or infomercially, that's where I have an issue. And we had that issue at 30 for 30, especially when 30 for 30 had success, and you get people pitching your projects, and you'd be like, is that a documentary or an infomercial? And most of the time it's an infomercial,
All right, so I got to ask you, as the co-creator of 30 for 30, how did you feel when they won the Academy Award for Best Documentary?
I mean, obviously I was happy. I really like Ezra, and I thought it was a great film. And it was something that, we had talked about for a while when I was there, and I felt like, it was nice to see it kind of blossom the way it did.
Was there a part of you that's like, oh, it's like my ex-wife or the new boyfriend, or was it more like my baby is now growing up?
No, it was neither. It was what it was. It was, to me, it's like, that was great content. He did such an awesome job. We had talked about, in the first 30 for 30 series, we did what was basically an OJ documentary, but it wasn't, about the one day when the car chase and all these other things that happened in sports that day. And that was one of my favorite 30 for 30s because it came out of this ideas meeting we had in the room where we kind of stumbled across the fact that all of these different things had happened on one day. But we knew there was more meat on the OJ bone. And it almost felt like it was too soon to really blow it out. And, you know, as time went on, then by the time it happened now, it's like that nostalgia sweet point, which is usually like 20 years after. It's almost like the perfect time to do something like that. And it's the best topic of all time. And Ezra did an unbelievable job.
And just to finish up, it's hard to even call a 5-hour plus documentary long form, but there's this perception that long form is old. It's done. It's, for me who works in long form, I don't want to hear this, but what are your thoughts on the future of long form in whatever form it is, whether it's written and it's online or whether it's
I used
for television?
to hate it at Grantland. That became one of the tags we got the first couple years, like long form. And it became like this little cottage industry, which I never understood. Like, something's good or it's not. I don't think it matters what the length is. I think when people try to do long form just to make it long, that's when it's not a good idea. Ezra's documentary was long because it was one of the craziest American stories of all time, and it intersected with, you know, race and sports and culture and the history of a city, and it should have been that long. You know, I think it was. When I was there, it was supposed to be three parts, 5 hours. And then it blossomed. I wasn't there when it blossomed, but it should have blossomed. When you watch it, it's like I don't remember thinking, "Oh fuck, what's he doing?" And this is he's really dragging along here. It's like you can't drag that along. It's an unbelievable story, and he did it well. I think when people get into trouble with long form is when it's like, here's my 13,000 word whatever, and it should have been 5,000 words. Like that's always going to be an issue. I should say that. I've probably overwritten more columns than anybody ever, so I'm qualified to have this opinion.
Well, you talk about an hour going by fast. I mean, a half an hour just has sped by way, way, way too fast. Can't thank you enough for making the effort to come in from California.
We didn't do the future of sports journalism.
We talked about
what was the future?
We talked about podcasts. We talked about different formats. Well, all right. So, what do you see? It's such a broad question, but what do you see as the future?
I see the future as niche sites kind of adding up to a larger whole. It seems like that's where we're going.
Niche sites such as what?
Just whatever. Like football is its own site. I mean, I hope that's not the case, because what we're trying to do, I think some sites can break through, some mainstream sites, but for the most part, it seems like people are becoming more and more focused on the one or two things they care about the most.
But I mean, every major sport has its own site.
Right.
So
but I'm saying,
what
like,
beyond that?
Well, I'm saying it gets even more focused than that. That would be the only thing I could see changing over these next 5 years. Is, are we going to see just more NBA only sites? Are we going to see like what Peter King did with MMQB? Are we going to see 5 more football sites that try to do that? Are the politics sites all going to be over here? Like, who's going to try to have something for everybody is going to get tougher and tougher, I think.
Well, so how does it affect you at the Ringer?
I hope it's a good thing, because you always want to be going in one direction when things are going in the other direction if you can pull it off correctly.
Oh, so your thought is that that's where everybody else is going to go, so you may end up being sort of last man standing? Or?
No. I think there's going to be a lot of people standing. I think you have to do what you're doing well. I think when you stretch yourself out and you try to do 20 different things and you're doing 5 of them well, that becomes a problem. So I think one of the things we try to focus on is, what are we good at? And right now, the things that we're best at are NBA and NFL and baseball and movies and pop culture and TV. And should we be in politics? Maybe. But if we do it, you got to do it right. And we didn't feel comfortable with a plan that we could throw ourselves into politics in the right way, in a substantial way. So then it's like, well, you don't want to dip your toe in that. It's too important. So when you do it from a position of strength.
Last thing here, though, because she's going to freak out here. She's wrapping me and choking me and all this sort of stuff, right? The concept of sports journalism, is that going to become oxymoronic? We're still going to have journalism?
I think sports journalism's been great. I think there's great pieces all the time. I would argue we're in kind of a glory stretch because it's easier than ever to find good pieces. Think back 10 years ago, if something wasn't forwarded around on Twitter, if somebody wrote a great piece, how were you going to find it? It was if somebody emailed it to you and that was it. And now I think if something's good, people are going to find it. You know, I saw in the previous panel the piece that Julie did, the 6-minute piece.
Right, more than
Everyone
me.
I know saw that. That resonated, that cut through. Would that have cut through in 10 years ago if we just had to forward it around? I don't think so. But social media made that into something that people saw and they thought about and they processed. And I still think good stuff's going to win.
All right. Is that enough sports journalism just
Yeah,
for
that's
now?
good. I think
Just for now?
I think we did it.
So a huge thank you to Bill Simmons. And since we saved the best for last, I do have to do a couple of quick thank yous. I want to get Bill to a few minutes at the Career Cafe. We have our lunches that are also being served at the same time. I do need to thank, for the Play It Forward conference, College of Communication, specifically the one person that this conference does not happen without, and that is Professor Susan Walker. The athletic department has been a terrific partner. The Howard Thurman Center, WBUR, ESPN's The Undefeated, which has streamed this. Lauren Gaffney, my terrific producer, who you always want by your side. But really, some great people that have helped put this conference on. But it really all came down to the panelists and to hearing their insights, their great thoughts, as well as...
Didn't you just do this for 4 hours?
Yeah.
I think you get tip of the hat. 4 hours.
Well, thank you.
It's hard.
Thank you.
You start
Thank
getting a little
you.
punchy.
Thank you. Thank you. I end in the easiest way, talking to you, so I thank you. Again, thanks to Bill Simmons. And thank you for joining us. Go have some lunch.